welcome to Spirit School Class 9 Plant Medicine. I have been waiting for this one. This is the one that I've mentioned in so many other classes because I could not wait for you to experience this class. Now, I have a very special guest with me today. It is my darling, dear soul sister friend, Renee. She is also known as Lady Pachamama, and that she is literally Mother Earth embodied in human form. I adore her. Her plant wisdom is unparalleled. I've attended many of her ceremonies and I've just been in her energy. And I am very sensitive to energy, and there are certain people that just connect with me, and Renee is one of them. I've dreamt about her and her partner. We are very connected. I adore her. I love her. It was an instant soul recognition for me, and I'm really honored to have her in this space. Now, unlike the other classes, I'm literally going to pass the mic straight to her right now because I want you to indulge in her energy too. And it won't be long before you are fully immersed and present in this space. So thank you for being here, Renee.
Oh, thank you, my darling. And I feel exactly the same way when we first saw each other. It was literally like a soul recognition. I still remember it to this day after having hundreds of people come through my door for ceremony. I can visualize that moment. It's amazing, isn't it?
Powerful. It was really powerful.
Yeah. So I thought what I wanted to do today was I wanted to open up the conversation around our connection to the Great Mother and to plant work with something I had written a while ago, because I'm kind of collating thoughts and insights at the moment to eventually write a book.
Okay.
So this is kind of some of those musings, and I was kind of looking through my notes today, and I was like, I got this really strong indication that I needed to share this particular writing with yourself and this beautiful group that are attending Spirit School. So let's start there, and then we can just see where we go from there. Yeah?
Perfect.
So this writing, it just felt so true for this group. So it's called Rooted in Nature. Following the seasons in our self-awareness. So I've got a little quote here from a guy called John O'Donohue. At its heart, the journey of each life is a pilgrimage through unforeseen sacred spaces that enlarge and enrich the soul. In his book, Walking in Wonder, Eternal Wisdom for a Modern World, John O'Donohue says, most of us are moving through such an undergrowth of excess that we cannot sense the shape of ourselves anymore. And to me, that is so true. And part of our connection back to nature is about kind of being able to pull off those imprints. And I know so much of your work and the work that the students were doing through this course is part of that, returning ourselves to our original soul spark, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So many have lost their connection to the cycles of nature, and in doing so have lost connection to themselves. We are at the core a reflection of the natural world. We hold within us the microcosm of the grand macrocosm of the cyclic movement of the Earth's journey through rebirth, life, and death. We are all cyclic beings. We experience the seasonal shifts in our bodies, each sun cycle, as we are experiencing the seasons through our lives, journeying from childhood to adult to wise elder. We aren't always aware of it, but our life experiences seasons of growth, abundance, decay, and death on a regular basis. When we make the space to go to nature as a guide, a friend, an ancestor, and we sit in silence, we will be able to see reflections of ourselves and fragments lost in time being called back to us. It was arranged this way from the beginning. As an animist, I often ponder the idea that nature dreamed us into being. The collective force of the natural world desired to have a co-creative relationship with the human spirit, for us all to be able to grow and learn inextricably. Each season, we are shown an aspect of ourselves, and in that revealing, we're given a way to manage the up and coming time. Traditional and Indigenous cultures across the earth have lived by the unbroken thread of knowing and reciprocity since the beginning. When days grow shorter and cooler, we naturally want to slow down and rest more. And as spring shoots up new life, most of us feel the urge to clear out the old and start new things. Autumn is a great time for self-care and calling in the harvest energy. It is a time of gratitude for all the gathering we have done over the last months, physically and energetically. Winter invites us to go deeper into the space of reflection, whole rest, and deep listening. I often call this time bone and bear medicine time. Spring and summer offer an opportunity to cultivate new practices that grow and sustain ourselves. We connect back to the earth by planting and growing our own nourishment, getting in contact with the soil, and walking barefoot on the earth. The autumn and the vernal equinoxes are major tipping points in the cycles. These are the times where light and dark are equal, when the sun and moon are at equal balance, the masculine and the feminine, both in nature, but also within ourselves. And this is a very potent and meaningful time in nature-based spirituality. We're invited to honor and create some stillness, offering celebration, recognition, and reflection time. So many changes occur for our plant and animal friends. The energy shifts in the seasons are symbolic for them. They have never been severed or separate, and they are forever tethered. If we just observe in a space of quiet listening, we can see that how this also relates to us. It's about getting out of our own way and consciously releasing what we think we know in order to free up the space for the wisdom to drop in. Then we can create a little ritual, make an offering, do some journaling, and tap into our own inner knowing and creative flow. Each change of the season, look into your own inner landscape with some self-inquiry, your own spark of knowing. Take the time, take this feeling into a wild or green space and see what unfolds. The health of our whole lives can benefit by embracing the changing of the seasons as an intimate part of our daily lives. Change, after all, is perhaps the only real constant. I know that was a bit longer than what I expected it to be. Sorry about that.
Amazing. Okay, everyone, plus over. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I felt like it kind of like tied up so much of of about connecting back. And I think one of the first things for us to understand in this realm, I know that you're covering lots of different kind of aspects, but is about the seasons and the cycles and how we are, you know, as within, the principle of as within, so without, as above, so below, which I'm sure you go into.
Of course. But that was just the way that was framed was so poetic, especially from, I got emotional when you talked about you know, the earth being like an animist wanting to create, imagine us into being. And I was just like, oh my God, I felt this wave of emotion come over me because, you know, we think of it in its profoundness, but really it's so simple, right? Of course, that we would be the extension of earth. And the way I've described it in another class is that essentially, so to offer you some context, is that we come from the original source, and that source wanted to know who it could be, and so it expanded, and the first breath, exhalation, was into first density, which is earth, right? Which are the elements and consciousness. And it breathed back into itself, and then it asked itself, who else could I be? And it breathed out into second density, which are the animals and the insects, and then it breathed back in and it breathed back out to know again who it could be, and it birthed humans, and it breathed back in, and so on to create all of the densities and dimensions. And it's just so profound that, you know, even in a few of the previous classes I've mentioned that the most enlightened wisdom that you will receive about God will come from the earth, right? And that is why this was such an integral part of spirit school for me, because without plant medicine, without understanding our connection to the earth, we are not here. We are not experiencing the 3D world. There is so much desire to enlighten and to reach high states of consciousness, but people don't know how to ground. People don't know how to connect. People have forgotten that the earth and us have this coexistence and this relationship that is ever flowing, and it's so powerful and potent. That was the perfect start to this conversation, and I'm so excited to keep going. So I'm just curious, before we even get into the work, how did you get into this space? Because it's not something that you just necessarily wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm going to study, you know, the earth. Like, how did that happen for you?
Well, I think for me personally, it started from my childhood because I grew up in a very small town in New Zealand where in the mountains. And so for me, right from my first breath, from that first exhalation into the space, I felt a deep connection into nature through my relationship with my immediate ancestors, being my tupuna, coming from New Zealand, which is the mountains and the lakes and the streams. And I was a really outdoorsy kid. So I kind of had this ability to be able to live in the space between and connect into the elemental realm from a really early age. And then, as per a lot of experiences with people who move into the shamanic or the lineage of the witch, we often have near-death experiences, right? So for me, I nearly drowned when I was 4. And I don't know if I've ever told you this story.
I have not.
Greg, but I nearly drowned. No. So, and I had a very incredible experience where the Taniwha, which is a water deity in the Māori tradition of the lake, pushed me up from underneath so that I wouldn't drown, pushed me out of the water.
Wow.
And a man then was able to come in and save me, but I was going down and under. I was quite far. I didn't know how to swim. I was only 4 years old. And I remember through what we call the non-ordinary reality in a shamanic perspective, in an earth-based shamanic perspective. So in the non-ordinary reality, because I lived in it so much, this Taniwha energy came up, pushed me up out of the water. And from that moment, I felt deeply connected to that lake more than ever. And I used to go and sit with the lake as a small child, and I'd watch the water coming in and out, and I would see that as the breath, the inhalation and the exhalation of the water. So deeply connected to the element of water in that way. And I've carried that kind of through. And then obviously we go to sleep as teenagers a little bit from our spirit. We often can disconnect at that point. But then in my late teens, I studied herbalism. And I also was initiated into the Green Witch lineage through a group of women who I spent quite a few months with, learning the old ways, learning through the old ways of through rites of passage and rites of initiation with plants. And so I got taught in the lived experience with plants. So not only did I actually study herbalism, through books and teachers, I also was able to live the experience through a group of women who taught me as well. So I was kind of lucky. I got things kind of in different angles. So I feel like it's really integrated into my my original blueprint and my soul spark, and I've probably done it many times before.
I was actually going to say, I would be like, I have no doubt that when we come into this life, we incarnate with a level of mastery in any particular discipline. Chances are you've mastered it in a past life. So it was definitely obviously something. You obviously have Green Witch lineage in your past lives. And of course, that's why it called you in this lifetime. It found you, right? It's like the things that are of us find us quite easily. I have no doubt in my mind, especially being in your energy, like you were just so proficient in this language and in this dialogue that it comes naturally, right? Like, yes, you've dedicated the time and the space to learning, but it was as though it was more a remembering, I feel, for you, because it was just like, I know this stuff. And of course, now I can put words to how I feel, but I know this stuff and it feels so profound. That's an amazing story. That is like, I hadn't heard that story, and I love that story. And I loved, there was a few things that got brought up there. Deities, which we've kind of skimmed on, but not really. And we may talk, I talked about deities in the mirror magic class, because I personally don't like working with deities, but I have a lot of witch friends who do, of course. And I always offer words of warning when working with deities, because they do offer a lot of sacrifice and offerings. And they're sometimes a little mischievous when you start playing in the deity realm. And also one thing that was good that you mentioned, there are different kinds of witches. Okay. Now, I always say we don't get wet by the word water. So it doesn't matter how you identify, it matters what feels good and true for you. Right. So if you get pulled in a particular direction, just play in that space. Right. And especially after this class, if you're really being called into plant medicine and learning more about earth and the earth spirits, go and play in that space. You don't have to identify, right? You can play in it and see where it takes you and see where it leads you. And they're all witches, like all covens, have their own processes and rules, right? Essentially, your initiation. But it's also important to note that you are a self-proclaimed alchemist, which means that you too can assign and assert rules, okay, based on your own practices. And I know that Renee's done that throughout her own experience, that now she has created rules for her own practice and her own rituals that have come authentically from her. So tapping into that, perfect segue. Let's start with a little journey. So essentially, before we even begin on the ritualistic ceremonial kind of practices, in which ways do you connect with the earth? Because obviously I've mentioned the words earth spirits and you talked about the elements, but how do you play with the mother?
Okay. Ooh, big question. So I'm very ritualistic. So I'm very much about being very humble. And I have something that I teach my students called the 3 R's, which is reciprocity, respect, and reverence. And I feel like if we can kind of cover those 3 protocols when we're going into that space, then we're going in there with an open heart, and we're going in there really humbly, and going in there being in the space of the observed. So we're not just observing nature, but we're understanding that nature is also observing us back at the same time, right?
Powerful.
Yes. And in that, we're tending to and cultivating right relationship as well. And that's what reciprocity really is. It's like it's that act of giving and receiving. So the way that I kind of make sure that I'm in those spaces of right relationship is through ritual and the daily sort of lived experience as well. And understanding that we hold that blueprint or that deep embodied wisdom within us. And when we're sitting in nature, what we're doing is we're taking the time to ask that question of nature, to be able to receive that message back to our own and deep embodied wisdom. And the ability we have then is for us to go deeper into that understanding. So for me, seasons and cycles is really, really important, of which I talked about in that sort of opening essay that I read. So I always work with the seasons. So I make medicine. So for me, that it's almost like I'm guided into the seasons by how the plants show up. So I'm always opening up my peripheral understanding. So you've got to slow down. So one of the things that I do is I take the time. And there's something that you mentioned right at the beginning when you spoke about the breath, the first breath, and wanting to experience itself. And if I could say there's one thing that we can do when we take the time to connect with the Great Mother and the earth is using the breath as a tool. So the breath, slowing our breath down, and the exhale, using the exhalation as a form of expression to connect to a tree or to a plant or to an element, to the river. Just that space of slowing everything down, because we all know that time doesn't really exist. We all know that time folds back in on itself. So we are master creators in that space. So if we just slow it all down by the exhalation, what it does is it expands and opens the non-ordinary reality, which is often when we're able to see into those in-between spaces. So that's when plant spirits will show up. But again, you mentioned it too, and I'm not big about the deity thing either, but with the elemental realm, it's the underworlds. We must be very, very careful about understanding that realm holds both aspects, really, both light and dark. And so we have to make sure that we have our, spiritual protection up. And when we're doing this, we're doing this with that reciprocity. So one of the things that I always do that I would recommend others to do is always make an offering. So if you have an offering with you, that's great. It could be a crystal, it could be some rose petals, it could be just your breath, but with intent and a prayer and a song. It could be, it's whatever feels true for you, actually, but it's the thought and the intent around the fact that that is an offering. I'm creating, and that tends to the magic, and it tends to feeding the spirit of place, of the plant, of the element. Or does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's this, the reciprocity, to simplify for anyone watching, it's essentially just an exchange of energy, just the same way as when you go and grab your cup of coffee from the cafe and you say thank you because and you're exchanging the money. There's always an exchange of energy. I truly believe that there must be an exchange of energy in all situations, whether it be with the earth or whether it be with others, because I can't offer my energy and not receive something in return, because that creates the imbalance, right? And what we know of the earth is that the earth doesn't like being in a state of imbalance. So it will naturally move itself into a place of equilibrium. And that's why we have natural disasters. And that's why we have all of these things, because it literally self-cleans. I always say, when people say we need to heal the earth, I'm like, I can assure you the earth can heal itself, right? You need to worry about self-reflection, right? Go within, baby, go within, because the earth is just good, right? It's one of the first things I learned about the earth is the earth doesn't need us to fix it. We need to fix ourselves, because we are the virus for the earth, essentially, because we're disconnected with self so often. And, the earth will mirror the energy and show us the parts of ourselves that are disconnected. So, absolutely. And that's what the exchange is. So I too, I'm all about offerings. I did a ceremony last night in which I suggested to everyone to go out. Part of your manifestation ritual, it wasn't even connected to the earth spirits, but it was like, go and make an offering. Tell the earth that you acknowledge that you receive in return. I heard this thing recently, which was very interesting. And it's that, are we harvesting plants, or are plants harvesting us? Because essentially they grow us through their oxygen, and eventually we, our flesh suit decides to transition, and then we go into the earth and become fertilizer for the earth, and then it regrows. So, who's harvesting who? But it's a very powerful reminder that there is that sacred exchange. And I think that, just as you said, it's the mindfulness and the intention behind it. Because people always ask me, what are you even offering? If you're offering rose petals that have come from the earth, is that an offering? Of course it is, because it's the intention behind it. Remember what, in every single class, I've reinforced this. Mastery requires two things. It's intention plus attention, right? Today, we have all of these people with lots of intentions. Exactly like Renee mentioned, everyone's in a hurry. They want to do everything now. They eat all the fruits of every season without actually acknowledging the season that they actually bloom. And so we have forgotten how to offer space and time and just slow down and surrender into the natural cycles of things. So we must marry those two worlds, right? Whereas our ancestors were very much so into the attention. They had far less intentions, much more attention. They would practice one ritual for their entire lifetime. Whereas for us, we can marry those two worlds and incorporate a number of intentions, but with the attention required. So perfect into the cycles. Okay, so now that we understand how you connect with the earth, how do you use her and her creations in your own medicine?
Okay, so probably a good way to sort of explain or have a conversation around this is, again, through the elements. So we work with the element of air, water, fire, earth. And then we have the space of the void, and the void is the great mystery. The void is where everything exists and nothing exists all at the same time. It's 0 point energy in the quantum field. And this is something I know that you talk about a lot.
We do, yeah.
And in that space, all of the elements exist. So they all return back to and are birthed from that space. So in every season, there is a predominant element. For example, in the winter, it's the element of water. And the fire is the element, summertime. So there's always a predominant energy force that sort of oversees like a totem energy. But then within that holographic exists all of them. And if we break it down, we can work with those elements all within that particular season as well. And then also with the plants it's themselves as well, because all plants have a predominant element as well. So plants that grow near water obviously are more water element predominant. And in Australia, a lot of the certain trees like eucalyptus, for example, that's a fire element energy, because as it burns down, it reproduces even better. So when we look at the elements, it gives us an indication of the medicine of the plants as well, and the frequency that they hold, both from a medicinal and from a plant spirit healing perspective as well. So the way that we do it too is if we look at the elements, for example, the earth element is plants that are food plants. So that's our fruit and vegetable, fruit trees, food forests, and the vegetables that we grow in a garden are really deeply connected into that element of earth, because it's working with the nourishment and the connection between our biome and our internal biome and that of the earth. When we look at the fire element, for example, that's healer plants, plants that work at clearing the energy. So a lot of you will know about sage and Palo Santo, and as I would also just like here to speak to bioregional plants that grow in your own region rather than using plants that grow from elsewhere. So eucalyptus for us. And then for the air element, for example, we would work with teacher plants that really give us a lot of lesson and indication about guiding us. For example, plants that move through, that teach us about movement and being in the space, more in a space of allowing. So for example, a plant that would sit here would be a plant called mullein, which grows in the spring and the summertime, but it's really, really deeply good for our respiratory system. But mullein, from a plant spirit perspective, really often shows us the deeper level of our understandings to do with how our trauma has played out. So yeah, and then the water element, for example, is dream and vision plants. So a lot of the psychedelics would sit in this particular element. So plants that help us see through or understand more through our dreams and our visions. But in saying that, something like dandelion is also a dream and vision plant, because we can just sit with this plant and we often will get shown. And dandelion's actually one of our plants in the plant spirit perspective that is a gatekeeper and kind of holds our hand and takes us to meet other plant spirits. So for me, this is a bit of a protocol or a formula that I teach with my students. And then we can break that down again, where we go, water element is where we'd make, if we were to make medicine, we would make a spray or a mist holding the plant spirit. The air would be a sacred smoke that we burn. The fire is also sacred smoke, because as we burn it, we transform it, but the smoke sends the prayer away, or the intent away, or whatever it is we want to clear away. And with the earth, we would make more medicinal plants, medicinal medicines like tinctures and infused oils and things that we would place in our bodies and on our skin, on the physical body. So you can see how you can kind of like, there's a bit of a formula in it, and from how I teach it anyway. Different herbalists and green witches would teach it in different ways, but this is kind of how I teach.
Your medicine. That's so powerful. And I think as Renee mentioned, this is her curriculum, right? And this is something that she dedicates her entire life. She's devoted to teaching this. And so, I will have all of Renee's links in the workbook as well. So I highly recommend you go follow her work, follow her medicine. If you are in Melbourne, definitely attend one of her ceremonies or, work with her. She actually teaches this to others. But it is also important to note that we all hold the codes, right? We are born with them. And the idea isn't for you to take anything that anyone says as holier than thou gospel. It's about taking that and letting it be the catalyst, right? And sitting with the earth. Exactly what Renee said. If you just sat with the earth without the idea that you need to go Google it, or you need to read it in a book, or you need to whatever, if you just sat with the earth, it would talk to you. Like there's a reason why you pick up a dandelion and you make a wish, right? Like how did that come, right? And it's because it literally, that's, you know, part of the experience of the dandelion was to take you on that journey. And so it birthed itself in that way, that it was a wish fulfillment, right, plant. And a lot of plants have that same kind of offering to you when it comes to their wisdom. They'll connect with you, they'll communicate with you. There's a reason why we use rose when it comes to love and connection and intimacy, right? Because they literally communicate with us, because they become the catalyst for our own emotions, and they tell us who they are as we tell them. And most of the language happens without words. I always say that the human language distorts energy, right? Because we're diluting its potency. How can I use a word to describe infinity? Like it's impossible, right? So that's the beauty of nature. You don't need to use words. You just connect and you feel it, and it will communicate with you. And yes, it does require a level of curriculum and education, learning all of these things, but a lot of wisdom can actually flow through you as you channel and connect. You must offer the space and the time to do so. It's not about just going for a walk and being like, talk to me, plants. It may start there, but it's about really connecting with the earth. So I am curious, you did mention a few of the psychedelics, and I know people's ears would be ringing as soon as you mentioned that, because that's often what people think about when they think of plant medicine, but that's not what I think about. I think about all plants as medicine. But I know that people are curious to understand, you know, psychedelics and the way in which Lady Pachamama uses these kinds of plants in her medicine. Now, foreknote for everyone listening, all plants are medicine and we must use them as such, okay? But there are certain plants that basically create chemical reactions in the mind that allow you to go on a spiritual journey, right? To argue, all plants do that, but in a different way. Okay, so specifically those that you mentioned under the water element, tell us a little bit about how that came into your experience. Because again, usually what happens, you're in your teenage years, someone gives you a magic mushroom and you go on this psychedelic journey, and that's how you're birthed into this world. But how did it manifest in your life?
Well, first I just thank you for speaking to the plants the way you are. It's so beautiful to hear someone else reflected back. And something that I just want to make sure I'm saying is plants are our ancestors. So when you were saying about how we hold the codes, we so do. Like I know this so deeply that we all hold that code because they're our ancestors. They were here before us. And they are literally part of our DNA. They really are. And we have a cannabinoid system in our bodies, which obviously cannabis holds. We have receptors in our body that are open and willing to receive the medicine of that plant, because it's one of the most beautiful plants that, you know, the earth was able to produce. It's just what happens with certain plants like cannabis, for example, and tobacco is another one, because tobacco is actually one of my master plant teachers. And when you understand these plants in their holographic realm and away from the way that it has been dominated and shut down through society and everything that we all know, it changes the frequency of it. Just chocolate's another one, sacred cacao as opposed to chocolate. There are sort of many. So for me, if I'm to speak in that realm of the psychedelics, I've experienced a few different psychedelics, plant medicines that work as vision and dream plants. And I think what happens is it's really super popular. And I think because of that, sometimes we lose our connection to what it's really about. But personally, from my own experience, I believe that one of the best things that we can do for ourselves is to work with plants that, or if you want to work with psychedelics, plants that are in your own realms. And the one that we have available to us in Australia is psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And I just happen to live in the forest that basically is where most of the magic mushrooms grow. So for me, it is a bioregional medicine. It's one of my master plant teachers or fungi teachers. and it is willing and able to work with me and other people here in the forest that I live in. So I think sometimes the experience comes through patience as well. And I'm just trying to think what else to talk to you about this particular
That's okay, if
subject.
that's all there is, if that's all that you
Yeah.
offer. I want to add a note there. So I will often receive, like, come across clients who will want to go on a psychedelic journey. And this is always my advice to them. I feel that a lot of people, you know, somehow get their hands across some kind of psychedelic experience, whether it also be ayahuasca or any other kind of experience, and it opens their third eye essentially, and they experience the higher realms of reality. Okay, and so they then get addicted to receiving that because they don't know how to get there any other way. It becomes their gateway. So then they get addicted to the plant. Okay, my advice is get yourself there first, and that requires practice. It requires meditation, it
Mhm.
requires devotion, it requires communication with God, universe, angels, whatever your truth is, right? It requires you to start building and opening the portal on your own, and once and only once the portal is opened on your own through intention alone and space, you can then connect with the plant to amplify that experience. It is always my protocol, right? Because I find that when people do it the opposite way around, it's much harder to learn how to open up the portal on their own because they always go in with expectation. I say go in with intention and release the expectations. And then over time, you will develop, you will develop, you'll develop. I personally don't receive the call for plant medicine, psychedelic medicine, and I have experienced them in the past, but I don't feel the call to them because I do it through meditation all the time, right? So I'm able to open that portal, so it's not required. There's a story of a monk who lived in some kind of mountain, and he received DMT, right? Like he was given DMT, and he goes, I feel nothing, right? He literally experienced nothing. And it was because he was always tuned into that frequency, to that high state of consciousness. So his body didn't require that specific medicine, right? So it wasn't even needed for his experience. So I just wanted to add that little note because, you know, and you don't have to follow that protocol anyway. But my point is my advice to you is learn how to do it on your own first to open up that portal, and then use the medicine as a medicine, right? To amplify the experience, as opposed to relying on it and becoming addicted on it. And as Renee mentioned, the Western world has abused medicine and plants, okay? And they exploit them. And that's why we have such a distorted relationship with plants, because we base our relationship with plants on the way they are commercialized, right? And we receive them in that way. And it is a very distorted relationship with plants. When's the last time people went out into the forest, and not just on a walk or on a hike, but actually connecting with the earth and speaking to the earth spirits? So perfect segue into earth spirits, because I know I've attended your ceremonies and you do channel and connect with earth spirits. They speak to you, they communicate with you. How do they communicate with you? What clair do you tap into? Is it more audio, or is it visual? How do you feel it in your body? How do you connect with the earth spirits?
Okay, so with the earth spirits, for me, it's a feeling space. So I feel like they step into my body, and I feel like in that moment that I am able to receive whatever information it is that they've got that they want to share with others. But I also have a medicine woman that steps in through me, that she holds a lot of that knowledge as well. So over the years, I've just become more attuned to know that real sort of change in frequency for me when it is happening. When that energy comes through, I just know what it is. But I didn't used to. It's come through the learned experience and the living experience of what that feels like. And the way that I manage it is through making sure that I'm creating ritual as well. So I take I take a lot of time before ceremony to connect into the work that I'm doing, to connect into the group of people that I'm working with, the medicines that I'm working with. I take my time. I do pre-ceremony ceremonies, post-ceremony ceremonies, and I take the time to listen and just slow everything down and listen. So often the way that I have seen it with myself, but also with students, is through synchronistic experiences as well. So when they're sitting with an element, so I do exercises with students where I'll get them to sit with a specific element, and what will happen is very synchronistic things will turn up in their reality creation in order for them to actually see the medicine that's being, that's being made available for them. I'm just thinking back, sorry, Greg, to your question about nature spirits.
It's
Can you
okay.
go back, link back into your question again, so I can, I kind
So
of lost the
I
thread.
actually think that that was perfect. I think that that was
Okay.
describing how you connect with the earth spirits and how they communicate with you. And again, I think if you take anything away from this, I think the most important thing to take from Renee is the space that she allows, right? If it weren't for the space and the time and the reverence, there wouldn't be the opportunity for the spirits to communicate with her. Everything, I often work with clients who want to strengthen their channeling abilities. I'm like, well, how much space are you offering, right? Don't expect your 5 minutes between your lunch break that you're going to receive some divine wisdom. You need to sit in that space and offer a lot of patience too, because as Renee mentioned, time isn't real, it's an illusion. I use a mantra it's called time expands for me, right? And I say it all the time because I recognize that I literally can bend and manipulate time, perceived time, and that it's not real. And you can sit next to the lake when we have done Renee's cacao ceremonies. It's also a forest immersion, and we go and sit with the lake, and you don't really know how much time you're sitting there, right? Like time ceases to exist. It feels like days, and it also feels like a minute, and it's both simultaneously. And I think that it's important that we just offer that space and that time, because we're in so much of a hurry, and all of this work requires devotion, right? It really does require that space to just connect and allow the wisdom to flow through you. And it will be dependent on your own clairs as well. You may have an inner knowing, you may have more of a visual experience, you may have an audio experience, you may taste elements or smell the plants, right? They'll come to you in different ways, and it'll be dependent on which of your clairs are dominant as well. But I think that that was the perfect understanding of earth spirits and how they connect with you. I am curious to know, so there will be people watching this class who have never really immersed themselves within nature and have never
Right.
really connected to the earth. What recommendation would you say for someone to just start building that connection? Where would they start?
I think a really good place to start is with trees, actually. Trees are storytellers, and they hold so much sacred wisdom, and they are so willing for us to connect with them. So if you can go to a wild space or a green space or a park, or even in your backyard, if you have a tree there, and just start to build a relationship with a tree, I feel like that is a really easy way, because they're just so happy to connect with us. And they're connected to the element of air, and they hold so much ancestral knowledge. And the thing about trees that amazes me is, one tree that you connect with, say, for example, we'll use eucalyptus again. If you connected with a eucalyptus tree, holds all of the knowledge and awareness and ancestral connection to all of the totality of all eucalyptus trees. So when you're connecting with one, you're connecting with all of them. And it's just a really easy way for us to start to bridge that gap into connecting with nature. I think, trees is the way to go. And a way that we can also do it, and this links into some of the medicine that I use all the time, which is through singing or song. And you don't have to know how to sing. It's not about that, but just using toning or using your voice through prayer or song, the nature spirits and the plants and the trees, they love it. They love us using our voice. So it could be absolutely anything. It would just be humming a song that that you heard on the radio. It doesn't matter. But that breath, using the breath and using the song, creates this beautiful connection, between symbiotic connection that happens between the tree or the plant or the element and ourselves. But I would definitely say go to a tree first before maybe you start connecting with the elements, because the elements they feel a little more elusive, whereas a tree is physically standing there in front of you like this great protector. Very tangible.
Very tangible. That's so powerful. I
Yep.
feel, and one thing that I think is important, a lot of the classes that we do today, do in Spirit School, basically offer us something in return, right? There's some kind of like, I will benefit from doing this. I will benefit from sex magic. I will benefit from tarot. I will benefit from this. Plant medicine to me is going in with, I will receive nothing from you, but what I will receive is a connection, is building the relationship. And I want it to be that alone, right? And over time, it will offer you the medicine and it will offer you the tools and the resources and the wisdom. But at first, it's literally just about building that relationship and connecting and not expecting anything in return, not expecting some profoundness download to jump into your psyche, but instead just being like, let's connect. And I think that we have forgotten that because we are so caught up in a world in which everything requires me to gain. Okay. And we've forgotten that it is that exchange. I was listening to this Indigenous man recently, and he was talking about in the Aboriginal language that there is no language, there's no word for mine, because everything is ours, everything is shared. And I think that we have forgotten that, right? Our ancestors knew that everything was shared, everything was ours. But, capitalism has made us feel that this is mine and I must hoard it because I have earned it. We earn nothing. Everything is offered right from the earth. And it's this class specifically is to remind you of that everything is this beautiful sacred exchange. And I just want you to build a relationship, because through that relationship, everything else is birthed, right? And it will offer you more than all of the other magic combined. Just rebuilding that relationship. And I should correct myself, it's rebuilding the relationship, because again, it's inherent. It's, as Renee mentioned, they are our ancestors. It lives within our DNA. So it's rebuilding that connection and honoring the beautiful elements and the plants and the fauna and everything that has been placed here for us to experience in the most beautiful way. And also to note that it is a mirror, right? You will literally be drawn to plants that mirror what you need at that time. I don't know if you've heard that thing that, every single ailment's remedy is offered in nature, right? Every single one. There is no disease without the natural cure, created on earth. Nothing needs to be artificial. And so the earth will mirror what you need. It's like I went to a healing with Renee not that long ago, and pine came up for me. And it was literally because my energy field required that medicine. And so it was connecting with me. And her, as such a beautiful, clear channel, was able to receive that wisdom. But that's how earth works with you. It will offer you what you need when you need it, right? So I love that. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Because I feel that was so filled with juice.
Well, just going back to the connection for people, there's something in the plant realm that we call the felt sense.
Okay.
And it is the feeling space. It's that that empathic space. It's the space where we receive the information through the emotional body, through the felt sense. And that is the heart. So it's the heart of nature. And part of our connection into ourselves is through the heart. And I think that's why it's such a fundamental architectural understanding for us to go back to with magic. Any magic is the earth, because when we do this, we are connecting back into who we are. And it's so humble. And it brings me always back to that saying, chop wood, carry water. Chop wood, carry water. The earth, really, one of my major learnings has been humbleness. And I don't think that I could possibly be the medicine woman that I am without that understanding of every single time I enter into this space, into the wild spaces, I'm going in with deep humbleness and reciprocity and respect. Yeah.
I don't know why this specific class has got me really emotional. I don't know if something's got like it really has made me so emotional. And I think, if anything, let this be a reminder for us all that there is so much wisdom in the earth. And, you know,
Mm.
again, we have this deep desire to enlighten ourselves and reach higher states of consciousness and connect with our galactic ancestors. But there's so much here still, right? We wouldn't have
Yeah.
incarnated into the 3D, into Earth specifically, if we didn't need its medicine. Okay. And so we need to remind ourselves of that. This was so amazing. Thank you.
Oh, my
Renee.
pleasure. Can I just say one more thing
Sure.
connected to what you were saying? I have this saying that fits into the eternity symbol where we move from the celestial into the terrestrial and back to the celestial and back to the terrestrial. We cannot separate the two, and we exist in that point between those two.
Beautiful.
So we've got to hold both spaces.
I
Yeah.
love that. I'll add that to the workbook, everyone. So that will be in the
Celestial,
workbook.
terrestrial.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Thank you for being here, Renee. Thank you for your wisdom. As I mentioned, all of Renee's links and details are in the workbook. I highly recommend you connect with her and just reach out and show her some beautiful love. She also sells beautiful tinctures and medicine that she creates. They are so beautiful. And again, they're created with so much reverence and devotion and reciprocity and love and all the beautiful energy that is birthed through her. And it's also channeled through her. So it holds her essence as well. That's important. It's not just the plants, it's her energy as well. And I obviously highly recommend that you connect with her because she's so beautiful. I love you, Renee. Thank you for this
I
beautiful
love you.
class. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I will see you on the next class. Bye.
Bye, everyone.